how much more do you have than most people have? You know, you need to make $30,000 a year to be in the top 1% of the socioeconomic distribution worldwide. You know, you always hear about the 1%, right? The evil 1%. And they churn, by the way, because it's not the same people all the time. It's like all of you here are in the evil 1%. And you think, well, that's not very fair because I was really only talking about within my country. Well, that's convenient for you. You know, it makes it really convenient argument for you. It's like, well, all those other people, those foreigners, they don't count. If they're poor, who the hell cares? It's the Australians that matter. You know, and so no, that's a non-starter. You know, and by historical standards, you're doing a hell of a lot better than the top 1%. I can tell you that. I read a nice article by a coalition called Human Progress the other day, and they were comparing the typical middle-class person who lives now with Rockefellers in the 1919s and say, well, would you rather be a middle-class person now or Nelson Rockefeller in 1919? And the answer seemed pretty damn clear that, well, you know, if you were Nelson Rockefeller, then you would have been richer than anyone else. And there's something to be said for that status, right? Because people do like to have more than others. I don't know if it's a good thing or not, but it is one of the things that we like. And so you'd have that. You'd be richer than everyone else. But there'd be all sorts of things that you have that now that Nelson Rockefeller wouldn't have had a hope of purchasing. Like the antibiotics that he would have needed to stop his son from dying, for example. You know, just as a start. And so I think this complaint about inequality. Look, no one likes inequality exactly. You walk down the street. This is why I always get a kick out of people who protest. I'm against poverty. It's like, really? You're against poverty. And you think that's a unique enough attribute so that it was worth your time to make a sign that said that you were against poverty and show other people. It's like, I've never met anyone that was for poverty. You know, you walk down the street with someone who's pretty well off, you know, and they've got 1920s spats on and a bowler, and they're feeling pretty damn rich, and a Stockster certificate sticking out of their back pocket, and, you know, there's a homeless person there, and they give them a good kick, and they say, the more poverty, the better. It's like, no. You know, when people walk down the street and you see homeless people, and they're often, homelessness is a complex problem. Like you think, well, homeless people are poor. It's like, yeah, man. That's like one problem they have out of 50. And like I've worked with poor people, you know, in my clinical practice, and poor in multiple dimensions. And many of them, you gave them money, they were just done. Especially if they were like alcoholics and cocaine addicts. As long as they were broke, they had some hope of living through the next month. But as soon as their unemployment check showed up, man, they were face down in the ditch 3 days later, right? Nothing but cocaine and alcohol with all their idiot friends for 3 days. And then they'd show up back in my practice saying, you know, God, I relapsed again. I said, well, what happened? Well, my money came in. It's like, yeah, money's really going to do you a hell of a lot of good. It just kill you faster than poverty. Now, not that there's anything good about poverty, but it's not like these are simple problems. You walk down the street and you see someone who's been an alcoholic for 20 years and maybe they're addicted to methamphetamines as well, or maybe they're schizophrenic. It's like, it isn't unequal distribution of monetary resources that is the primary cause for that problem, and it isn't going to be some sort of straightforward redistribution that's going to fix it, because it's way more complicated than that. How hard should you work? Well, that's a really difficult question. If you're going to die tomorrow, and then you probably shouldn't work very hard today at all. So one thing you might say is that the degree to which you should work hard is dependent on your assumptions about the stability of the future. We actually know this to be true because if you put people in wildly uncertain circumstances, they discount the future, which is exactly what you should do, right? It only makes sense to store up goods for future consumption if the future is likely to be very similar to the past and the present. You need a stable society for that. And conscientiousness only works in a stable society. Because all you do otherwise, if you're piling up goods, which is kind of what conscientious people do, is leaving them there for the criminals to take, or waiting for the next chaotic upheaval to wipe out everything that you've stored. And so even conscientiousness is a kind of guess. Hardworking people say, well, you know, sacrifice the present for the future. That's great, as long as the future is going to be there and you can predict it. But if it's not going to be there and it's unpredictable, then the right response is take what you can take right now while the getting's good. Now, you know, obviously there are troubles with that too, and I'm speaking, you know, I'm offering rough rules of thumb, but I'm trying to provide you with some indication of how and why these difference in value structures exist, because they're applicable in different environments. You know, sometimes in a dangerous social environment, it's not obvious that being an extroverted person is a good idea. Because extroverted people, they stand out, especially if they're extroverted and creative, right? Because not only are they noisy and dominant and assertive, they're also colorful and flamboyant and provocative. Well, that's great if you're in a society that rewards that sort of thing, but if you have, you know, if you're ruled by an authoritarian king who wants absolutely no threat whatsoever to his stability ever, then dressing in gray and shutting the hell up is a really good survival tactic. Most of the radical types, they follow Marx and they say, well, one of Marx's dictums was that capital tended to accumulate in the hands of fewer and fewer people. And that's right, that's true. Wealth and capital, income for that matter, but not only that. Whatever it is that you might like to have accumulates in the hands of smaller and smaller numbers of people. It's a principle that was discovered by an economist named Pareto, Vilfredo Pareto. And he pointed out something that had been pointed out in the Gospels, by the way, thousands of years earlier, which was, to those who have everything, more will be given, and from those who have nothing, everything will be taken away. The rule being, once you start to succeed at something, the probability that you will continue to succeed ever more rapidly increases. So there's an exponential function with regards to success. But there's also an exponential function with regards to failure. So failure and success aren't like this. They're like this. Fail, fail, die. Succeed, succeed, succeed ridiculously. Like it's this weird curve. And it's funny because it doesn't just characterize economics. It's a really it looks like a really fundamental economic law. I was actually quite shocked when I first learned about this, which was only about 15 years ago, because I thought most things were normally distributed. It turns out that that's not true. What people produce creatively isn't normally distributed. A small proportion of people produce most of what's of value. It doesn't matter what it is. And you know this, it's like, how many books does Stephen King sell? It's like half the books, right? And then there's the next guy after Stephen King, and no one even knows who he is, and he sells like 1/10 as many books as Stephen King, and then there's author number 50, and out of thousands and thousands of offers, and he's barely scraping by, and then there's the bottom 99.9%, and they can't make a living writing. And that's how it is, and it's the same with musicians. And it's the same with athletes. You know, if you look at number of goals scored, for example, in hockey, I'm a Canadian, so I'll use that, there's a small percentage of absolutely phenomenal hockey players, even in something as amazing as the National Hockey League or any professional sports league. You know, you have to be one hell of an athlete to make it in a professional sports league, and still you get this tiny group of superstars who are way better at it than anyone else. You know, and so there's this weird rule that as you get more, getting even more gets easier. And who knows why it is exactly? Partly it's practice, and it characterizes all sorts of situations. Like, it characterizes the size of planets. A small number of planets have almost all the mass. It characterizes stars the same way. It characterizes biomass in the Amazon jungle. It characterizes city size. A small percentage of cities have almost all the people. It's like, what's that? And then you go back 10,000 years, you look at a Paleolithic gravesite, and you see what people are buried with. And like there's one guy, there's two guys there, he's just covered with gold, right? The gravesite is insanely rich, and everyone else has like a bone, and it's theirs, and that's it, you know? And so you analyze Paleolithic gravesites, you see exactly the same Pareto distribution. A small number of people are buried with all the wealth, and almost everyone else has none. And so it's this unbelievably deep proclivity of resources to distribute themselves unequally. And you know this too, because you play games like Monopoly, right? You've all played Monopoly. What happens when you play Monopoly? You all start out equal, right? Exactly 100% equal, and you all have an equal chance of winning because it's basically a game of chance. Not entirely, because you can play stupidly, but you know, but you can only play so intelligently because you're at the mercy of the dice. And what happens inevitably is that some evil capitalist ends up with all the money and all the hotels and all the houses and just like takes you out. And yet you play and you don't think, oh my God, you know, there's something fundamentally unfair about that.